Disinformation knows no borders, and today the stakes seem higher than ever. Welcome to Truth Talks, a bold podcast series tackling the challenges of fake news and propaganda head-on. Join us for engaging short conversations with experts from all EU member states and Ukraine as we uncover the truth behind dominant disinformation trends and explore the strategies shaping Europe's fight against manipulation. In this episode, we are zooming in on Austria. Today's guest is Dietmar Pichler, founder and president of the Disinfo Resilience Network, specializing in foreign interference, propaganda, and subversion. Welcome to Truth Talks.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you. Austria is a country with a strong tradition of political neutrality and high media consumption. But even here, disinformation finds its way into public debate. What are the dominant disinformation narratives circulating in Austria?
There are so many, I don't know where to start, but I think the elephant in the room at the moment is the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. And since 2014, this was the beginning of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And what we saw back then is that, unfortunately, Austrian politics and Austrian society was very hesitant to accept the reality. And when I say that neutrality makes us more vulnerable to disinformation or Russian narratives, then I mean that sometimes some people, they think that neutrality means a kind of neutrality towards reality. So we have a kind of alternative reality with our neutrality. And this opens the door for both sidism, for false balance discussions, which we have a lot. And then we have all these narratives against NATO, that NATO is responsible for the Russian aggression. Also, when it comes to Georgia, when it comes to Ukraine, of course, but also the hybrid warfare, we excuse everything that Russia feels threatened by NATO. So this is a very dangerous narrative that we have. And then we have the whole collection of fakes. Yes, for instance, that the Americans paid $5 billion for the Euromaidan revolution. So this is something that you can hear all the time since 2014. And unfortunately, which makes me much worried, not only on social media and in the digital sphere. So I think in the digital sphere, you have the same things everywhere with a little bit of an adaptation, but in Austria we have it also in the universities. We have a lot of NGOs promoting these things. We have the peace movement from the 80s that is promoting basically a kind of a narrative that both sides are to blame, or even more the West is to blame and Moscow is only defending itself. So the old tales, if you look at history, then you find exactly what is happening now as well. It's so ridiculous in some ways. When you watch some documentary about the 80s, about the Soviet influence in the German-speaking world, you have everything that is happening now, except, of course, the social media, which is the only new thing.
Yes, I have noticed that. I have heard that, for example, Poland, with our opposition to what Putin is doing against Ukraine, that we collectively are endangering Europe and our peace. So for me, it sounds like indeed Austria being a kind of a so-called, infamously, a peace camp of Europe. And of course, there are also rational arguments for this stance. And why do you think it's Austria that is the dominant country and community belonging to this peace camp?
So first of all, I want to say that we have a new government now, and also the previous government was not a pro-Russian government, not anymore. We had pro-Russian governments before 2019 and after the annexation of Crimea. So, I mean, pro-Russian, this is something that you have to define, but I would say appeasement, a lot of appeasement and very friendly relations with the Kremlin. And now we have a government which has a clear position, in my opinion, regarding to Austrian standards, of course. But the problem is that we need to explain to the population why we have this position, why we support the European integration, for instance, of Ukraine, but also the European defense policy, united foreign policy. And this doesn't happen enough, in my opinion. We need to fight all these narratives that are persistent for so many decades. And when we speak about countries like Poland, or Lithuania or Estonia and Latvia and Ukraine and Georgia, all these people with their unique experience, I think it is really a shame when we blame them. This is all this victim blaming, which we see all the time when they say, yeah, they are hysterical because of their history. And I always say, no, they are not hysterical. They know their history and they know what it means to be a neighbor of Russia. They have all the skills and the information and the awareness for this topic, which we lack. So it's not them what is the problem, it's us which is the problem, that we refuse to understand what the Russian policy is about. And this is the biggest problem. We had this Russian lens for decades, also in Germany and in many other countries, that the whole history of all these countries which were occupied and suppressed by Moscow, the Russian imperialism, it's not in our school books. I think working about that is more important than debunking the daily fakes on social media.
And who do you think is to blame for this Russian first-tier attitude towards Russia and not so much understanding attitude to countries that are more hawkishly in relation to Moscow?
I think it's a mix. First of all, we have, of course, economic relations and economic interests. This is something. And also these people, when they have a policy like they want to sell something to Russia or they want the gas or something, then they excuse it by parroting Russian narratives. It's always like if you do something bad, you want to excuse it. Even if you know it's not okay, you want to find excuses for it. And then we have, of course, the far right, who is very, in almost all countries, in Western Europe, is very Moscow friendly and anti-EU or EU skeptical, which means nothing else than anti-European Union integration, of course. And then we have the far left, we have the peace movement, we have peace research, which is, in my opinion, disputed that it's a real science. And these movements, they always try to appease, to find a negotiation solution, but they ignore what the Russian imperialism is about. I mean, if you listen to what they say on their state media, what the Russian officials say, it's always about that they want to regain control of former countries they former had under their control. And this is the peace movement since a long time. They ignore it. And if we take a look back to the early 80s, when it was about the Pershing II rockets and the deterrence of the Soviet Union, the same people who protested against NATO in the late 70s and early 80s are now protesting against weapons support to Ukraine. These people were very young back then. Now they are old. They are, some of them are influential. And we know that, especially in Germany, these movements were infiltrated, orchestrated in some ways by the KGB and other Eastern European intelligence services. So I think what we need now is to build resilience and to have a more honest discourse which understands that these movements were not genuine I mean, at least not 100%.
I have analyzed the Austrian opinion polls, and I have noticed that FPO, so Freedom Party of Austria, has been winning in the polls for over 2.5 years. And actually, the winning level has been extremely high, so around 14 percentage points for over half a year. How do you think the success of far right is aligned with this peace attitude?
Yeah, well, it's difficult. I mean, if you compare it to the Cold War, then the far right in the peace movement is something new. And what is also new, I mean, Cold War on the Western side, and what is also new, that the far right is such a huge movement, that there are so many, that they have such high percentages in not only in polls but also at elections. But what we see also in Germany, we see that in some cases they even have rallies together. There are some old commies coming together with some far right activists, and they don't have a problem because they completely forget about domestic policy, and they say we have one common goal, and this is peace with Russia, as they call it. And that's quite significant, and we should not ignore it. And then what we have, of course, is the whole discourse in the Western world is highly influenced by Russia. In that case, of course, it's social media and the digital sphere, because they can manipulate it very easy and also cost efficient. And it favors the far right policy because it's the anti-EU, it's this distorted view of traditional values and all these fake news. And the far right in Western Europe, they respond to it, and they deliver these kind of narratives, and they deliver this for the voters. So the Russian propaganda helps them a lot. And then we have some obscure far left parties everywhere in Europe, and they also, of course, benefit from these developments and from the Russian influence. In Austria, it is not that big, so the communists are not in the parliament, and they are not as radical as in other countries, even if there are a lot of members who have an old Soviet nostalgia view. And it's very, I think, I consider everything that is subtle and not less obvious pro-Russian even more dangerous, because it goes into the center of the society. Yeah? And we know how the far right is, what they believe in, what their policy is. But unfortunately, there are others too who fall for Russian narratives. And then it becomes even more dangerous, because who is left? Who is going to correct the mistakes? Who is going to do a decent policy?
Okay, so let's come back a little bit to my first question. So, about the major disinformative narrative circulating in Austria, you mentioned the full scale invasion, and we have been discussing that so far. But could you mention any other narratives that are circulating and that are important in Austria?
Yeah, of course. When we speak about the full scale invasions, of course, also what happened in 2014. So there is still the distorted view that there was an internal conflict, an ethnic conflict, or even a civil war. So people deny the Russian involvement in 2014. And we have still some fakes about MH17, but this is one of the few examples where it got better, because there are a lot of investigations, and it doesn't look good for the conspiracy theorists anymore. But then we have this anti-EU sentiment that the EU is to blame. We have all these reverse victim blaming regarding Ukraine, that we say, yeah, but the Ukrainians attack the Russian population in Ukraine, which is completely stupid, because it makes no sense at all. Also, people with Russian parents in the government in 2014, 2015, yeah, but they ignore all these facts. Then we have very old myth that Russian language is banned in Ukraine, which is also obviously not true, because when I got interviewed by Ukrainian media, very often I'm also published in Russian. So yeah, but it's very difficult to get these things out of the heads of the people, because we never had a campaign to inform people. There was no awareness campaign. There was no real effort to inform people. Like, for instance, during the pandemic, we have a lot of fakes still going around about the pandemic. I don't see myself in a kind of pole position to raise awareness about that, because so many people already talk about it. But the conspiracy theorists, they still believe that there is a mind control in the vaccine. They still believe about the microchip. We have this movement, and we also have to acknowledge that these people, I remember it very well in 2022, they were rallying against the vaccine or against the measurements, the COVID-19 measurements. And after the full-scale invasion, suddenly they had Russian flags. So this is, of course, this conspiracy theory scene. They are very open for pro-Russian views as well. But at least we had a lot of people who spoke about it. We had the doctors, yeah, we had the pharmacists. You knew where you can get accurate information, even if we had some doctors who were conspiracy theorists as well. But if it's about something political, if it's about geopolitics, everybody is allowed to say everything, and we consider it it's an opinion of many. And we have in political science in the universities, we have a lot of distorted history when it comes to the Soviet past, the Eastern Bloc, and all the suffering. It is not something we learn a lot about, and that is a problem, especially for the countries who suffered so long, and who ask for justice for their Russian crimes.
Okay, so now let's turn to the issue: who does it? Who stays behind not only disinformation itself, but also behind spreading it? Because sometimes some of the fringe narratives actually come from the bottom, and they are just spread by malign actors. How does it look like in Austria?
What we have in Austria is what is, I think, very specific and important to mention. We share an information environment with Germany. And Germany is the main target of Russian influence in the European Union. And what they see, to some degree, we also see, because we have the same television channels, so we watch their television. And on social media, you can imagine, with the common language, everything is mixed. Sometimes you don't even know if you speak to a German or Austrian person. And when the Russians are targeting us, when there are troll farms, which are everywhere around the world, they have kind of mercenaries. When they are targeting, then they target on topic. They wait until somebody speaks about Russia, Ukraine, and then they attack. They don't care if this person is in Vienna or in Berlin or Munich or something. So this is very important, because sometimes Austrians say we are not the main target, we are too small. Yeah, it doesn't matter. We get it. There's a lot. And then I think which worries me is we have enablers and friends of the Russian propaganda. I never used that term, but I would say agents of influence. It's an old term from the Cold War, and they still exist. So first of all, we have the agents of influence from the Cold War who somehow got reactivated. I don't say that they are all paid, but some have ideological views. And then we have a lot of people with close ideological ties to anti-Western sentiment in the universities, teaching, and not students also, but and some in the media sector, in the NGO, activists in civil societies. We have a lot of neutrality initiatives where they promote basically peace with Russia and disarmament. But then when you dig a little bit deeper, you find all the Russian narratives. These peace activists, and I find it very dangerous, to be honest. And then, of course, the far right, they have these obscure French media websites. They promote a lot of conspiracy theories online. From everything from COVID-19, which was a trigger for many people, and whatever you want, anti-Semitism, anti-EU sentiment, and then also the pro-Russian narratives. They have a lot of reach now, and to be honest, we don't know who is financing them. But what we know is that Russian trolls and Russian profiles on the web, they can manipulate the algorithm. They can push content. And it doesn't matter if you give somebody money, if you push their campaigns. We saw it in the US elections. This is equal to money, because reach means everything in advertising.
Indeed. Okay. Now I would like to ask you if there's anything that makes Austrian disinformation landscape unique, anything that makes it different, separate from, for example, German ones and that of other European countries.
Yeah, so to answer this question, I have to go back to the beginning of our conversation. So Austrian neutrality is what makes us uniquely vulnerable to Russian influence, regarding one argument that we should be neutral towards the Russian invasion. We should not side with Ukraine. This is one argument that we have, but it's complete nonsense, because Austria is not a political neutral country. We are just neutral regarding military issues. We are not part of a military alliance, which is not even so important anymore, considering we are a member of the European Union, and we also accepted that we have to support our allies if they got attacked. For instance, in the Baltic states, if something happens, we have to support them. But this is very difficult to explain to some Austrian people who thought that Austria is a neutral country regarding reality, as I said before. So if Russia is attacking Ukraine, we should just close our eyes and maybe offer Vienna to be a negotiation place. It was not even the case during the Cold War. And in the Cold War, we were not a member of the European Union. But of course, you can exploit our military neutral status to promote some narratives to distort reality. And this is what makes us even more vulnerable than other countries. But compared to Germany, we don't have the GDR history. We don't have all these people who have the communist nostalgia. I mean, at least not to that extent. Yeah? So this is something at least we don't have.
Probably you have different kinds of nostalgia.
If you are talking about the lack of democratic experiences because of our responsibility during World War II, most of the people of this era, they do not live anymore. But we have an additional problem. In 1938, when we got annexed, it was not really... I mean, the resistance was ridiculous, if there was any real resistance. We have all these pictures, and this is in our mind, I think, also an additional problem that we cannot grasp that somebody can defend himself, that a war can be a just war. It can be that you're fighting for your freedom and not only to attack somebody and not only to suppress somebody. I don't know. It's not in our minds anymore. We're not bold. We are not... Okay, I don't want to speak too bad about my people, of course, because some of them are going to listen. But regarding that issue, that defense is important. That it's a very good thing to fight for your freedom. I saw it also during Euromaidan. I was there and came back to Austria. I couldn't believe the narratives that I heard. That why do these people fight? It should better go to Russia. And we have this sense to better subjugate and don't fight back. And this has something to do with World War II, of course, in many ways. But we should move on, and we should not let other people suffer for mistakes that we did in the past. Because when we said, yeah, we did something, we attacked the Soviet Union, and now we should allow them everything. But Poland, for instance, did not attack anybody. They were just defending themselves. And we also need to speak about 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, also known as Hitler-Stalin Pact. This is something that needs to be in the school books, and we need also to educate people about the fact that we have been allies with the Soviet Union against other countries in the east of Europe and Central Eastern Europe. And I think that would make a huge difference, but it also takes some time to develop a new thinking.
Okay, so let's maybe try to find something positive instead of this history of denial. So what's being done to counter disinformation in Austria, and what more would you recommend?
I think we need to start to do a lot more. Yeah. So what I know is that we have a task force in the ministry where people speak to each other. And one development that I personally, and not because I'm arrogant or something, but because I think it's important, I realized that people are listening also to me now. So I have people where I can deliver the latest news and the latest narratives. And this was not the case after 2014. So in 2014, the governments were like, please don't distract us with facts. We want to continue living in our fantasy regarding especially Russia and also other issues and Western. I think that we have now a government, especially foreign ministry, which has a very, very clear position. And I hope that this goes on, and I hope that they also put all the efforts into explaining this position and not trying to appease all the propagandists. It doesn't matter if they are domestic or international, foreign or domestic, because they are going to push, they try to lobby the government or try to attack us to change their opinion. They call the foreign minister, for instance, NATO Beate, just because she's supportive of Ukraine and the European Union. So this is also a problem, what we have, the demonization of NATO. It doesn't matter, Austria is a small country, if we are a member or not, but this constant demonization of NATO, like it's North Korea or something, or the axis of evil, it's really stupid, because most of our European partners rely on the security umbrella of NATO, and I know why they are doing it, and they have good reasons to do it. And I think, at least out of respect, we should stop with these kinds of rhetorics. And I hope that all the efforts are going to be invested. We need to invest a lot of money in countering foreign interference in all countries of Europe. I think, especially in Western Europe, it's not only Austria where we still underestimate that essential threat to our democracy.
Okay, it would be great if our discussion is listened to by many Austrians. Thank you so much for this pessimistic, but at the same time very insightful discussion.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for the opportunity. Wish you all the best.
Truth Talk series is part of the project Guardians of Truth, fact-checking during Poland's EU presidency, which is supported by European Media and Information Fund, managed by Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation.